Hey humans, what's up? It's your friendly neighborhood alien here. I have some hot takes for you today on a book that I absolutely love. If you were able to catch my January Reads video, this one was mentioned, but I also said that I would like to make a longer video to talk about this book a little bit more in depth. So, I read this book, I could not stop thinking about it. So, if you watched my last video, I mentioned that I was going to do another video on this book because I wanted to get a little bit more in depth. I absolutely love it. I cannot stop thinking about it. Even still, like, it is in my brain a lot of the time. I actually got my mom to read it as well, and we both like make references constantly. She loved it so much that she's been like buying it for other people and telling other people to read it. And so I want to spend some time today talking about the Book of George. So George is in his own little world that Kate Greathead has created. And as you can see, I got it from one of those book subscriptions. So this was a pick that I had. It was from a couple of months ago and it sat on my shelf for a little while. I can't remember. It doesn't say exactly which month it was from, but I'm pretty sure that I got it like as an add-on. And so I didn't get it like when it was brand new. But when I go through and talk about the ratings, just keep in mind that it still doesn't have a ton of ratings yet because it is still a pretty new book. Like, I thought it was gonna be about like encountering these different guys and like kind of looking at like duds, so to speak, because it's like everybody has a George, everybody's dated a George, blah blah blah. Like, that's kind of what it alluded to, and then that's referenced a lot in the comments on how like a lot of people know a George or they've witnessed somebody dating a George. And so I didn't really fully quite, I guess, know what I was getting into, but I was pleasantly surprised. I loved this book. So, in case you're curious, Goodreads only gave it a 3.44. Now that's an average, and so, there are people that liked it as much as I did, and people that liked it way less than I did. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. And I think that Kate Greathead really did some great things. See what I did there? But I think like this was a brilliant book, a brilliant story that was pretty powerful. So on this channel, I like to look at the Goodreads reviews, see how far off I am from the average reader. And so as you can see, it was under 3.5, so that means that it is closer to the 3 than it would be to a 4. So I am like pretty far off with my 5 from the average. And then I also like to look at comments from the most popular ratings. And then in those comments, kind of looking at what are generally people saying. A lot of times these ratings and reviews are ones that have a lot of comments, have a lot of likes. People are engaging with it. Now, in general, this one is a little bit more challenging because as of when I looked at it, there were almost 1,500 ratings with like the comments in the 400s. So at this point, it might have changed. I was looking through and preparing for this video, and so if you look now, it could be different because I'm sure people have been reading it, but as of when I looked at it, only 11% were giving it 5 stars. 4 stars made up 38%, and 3 stars made up 36%. So a majority of the reviewers were, in the 4 and 3 stars. And so we're going to kind of look at that. However, in the 4 stars, a lot of people were kind of feeling a similar way to what I was, except like I think maybe I like went way more in depth in my analysis with this than kind of the average reviewer. That doesn't mean that other people weren't doing that, but I think that like overall people weren't necessarily gleaning what I was gleaning out of it. And so I think my infatuation for this book was deeper because of that. But overall, I didn't really focus on the 4 stars because they were kind of just generally like, this is a good book. I enjoyed it. The writing was good. So what kind of makes my opinion different from a lot of those just kind of general 4 stars was that I can only say great things about this book. So I'm going to focus mainly on the 3-star reviews and some things that seem to be commonalities between what people were seeing. So I'm going to go into kind of some of my kind of thoughts that other people didn't really address towards the end. And so we are going to first talk about kind of what some other people were saying. So overall, I feel like people were hating on George a little too much. Now, in my opinion, this story was really a very unique, a very good way of showing kind of a different perspective on, in general, how people can really develop a personality based on the influence or lack of influence of other people. So like I said, we follow George through his life. Each chapter usually shows a section of his life. So sometimes it's a span of different ages, like in his earlier years. Sometimes it'll be like months within a certain age. Sometimes it'll just be like an age in general. And so it's really kind of like a different way of setting it up in general. Like different chapters are kind of like different vignettes of George's life. And so we don't get this like play-by-play. As you can see, it's not super thick. It was like 270 something pages in this hard copy version. And so, you know, it took me about a day. Like I blasted through this, but it really, like, not a lot necessarily, like there's a lot of plot points, I guess, because it is like she does highlight like events that would be kind of important to the overall development of the story. But a lot of what I loved about it is kind of the impression that it leaves you with. And like I said, like my mom read it too. She actually changed her rating from 4 stars to 5 stars because after like she sat with it, then she was like, I really liked that book. And like we make references to George all the time now. My brother has moved in with me and she was helping him move. We were just kind of helping him move and she was getting his stuff. And there's a point in the book where George is moving and we'll talk about Jenny, but she's his girlfriend in the book and Jenny is helping him. Really, she's the one that's like packing up his stuff and trying to go through everything, and George is just like sitting there playing on his little Game Boy that he found. And so we keep joking. I'm sorry if you heard that. That is a cat in the background getting the zoomies. So we keep joking about like, you know, how my brother's kind of being a George. But anyway, there are so many things in this book that are relatable. And so like seeing her kind of commentary on how important influence is to character development was very interesting to me. So I completely got off track there, but let me go back to, you know, we're seeing these little vignettes. We're seeing like his childhood and his parents split and some things happened there. At one point, his dad ends up coming out of his life. So his dad is no longer in the picture. I won't really kind of get super in depth into what all that is about because I want you to have some, you know, experiences through George's life. And then, so like his mom is kind of like, she's not absent as far as like neglectful, but she's really not super involved in his life. And then you have his sister who has like her own thing going on. And even as they grow up, like her relationship with him is very interesting. and then you have his kind of like long-term on again off again girlfriend, and then he has like these friends that he made in college, but they're not all super close. And so throughout his life, like George doesn't really ever have this person that really has a huge impact on him, except I guess Jenny, but it's kind of in a different way, and he has a lot of people like enabling him. And so I feel like that is all so important to his character development. And so, you know, you get this feeling like, yes, George is not emotionally intelligent at all. George has some deep issues. He can be a jerk sometimes. He is just overall really not like a great person. I wouldn't say that he's a horrible person. Like, he doesn't really ever do anything that is just outrageously unacceptable, but he really doesn't have that understanding of how to persevere, how to treat people kindly. And so really, like, this is very interesting to me, this story, because you see how he's kind of left to himself how to be a functional, well-rounded human who is, you know, giving something back to society when nobody really ever taught him that. And so I think it's a very interesting glimpse into what happens when some of these things don't come naturally to people. And, you know, like I said, like, he didn't really ever have like a strong influence of like a mentor or somebody outside of his family. I think that he like saw a lot of things happen, but he didn't really know what to like do with these lessons that he was learning. And so you see like this contrast with him and Jenny, and Jenny has like experienced things that almost were probably worse in some perspectives, but she had more support. She had family. I'm pretty sure it mentions like she went to like therapy or something. And so you see Jenny kind of being able to handle things a little bit better. And I said earlier that she enables him because she really honestly does. And so I think that this is just a story of what happens when like people just kind of skate by. They're kind of in the middle. Nothing really super horrible happens to George, but nothing really great ever happens to George. And so I think you really just kind of get this capturing of like, yeah, a lot of people know a George. And what are we? I'm sorry, that's Tiny Tina. She's, I don't know. She likes to look at herself in reflections, so I think that's what she's doing. Baby. And so you really get to see what happens to someone when they just kind of get stuck in this middle, get stuck in the flow. And, you know, what do we do as people who encounter these Georges in our lives? You know, a lot of people were talking about in the comment or in the reviews about, you know, kind of trashing on George and being George haters. And it's like, you know, so what it like, but this is, to me, it was so realistic, so just kind of raw and real that like, why are we not talking about how do we fix this George problem? You know, like, I think that's what we should be talking about. But so, you know, a lot of that, like George having an incompetent personality, being angry at George, and it makes me think like, you know, yes, George is frustrating. Yes, you can be angry at George for these bad or inappropriate or inconsiderate actions and words, but, you know, what does that say about people that are George? You know, like, it really lets you see what happens when somebody grows up like this. So something that a lot of the comments were talking about that I didn't really necessarily agree with was that, you know, really this was a story about Jenny. It should have been from Jenny's perspective. And I think like you're fully allowed to think that way. And if you really feel like this should be the book of Jenny, or, you know, the book of George screwing over Jenny, you know, sure. And, you know, I think that it could have been an interesting book. I do think that Jenny was a pretty good character, and she did deserve better than George was treating her. But, like I said, like all of those things that I said earlier are really the lesson here and really kind of the morals and the depth of the story. And so I feel like if it was from Jenny's perspective, we wouldn't have gotten to see those glimpses of, you know, George trying. And that was another thing, like, you know, there's not any character growth from George. And yes, in a way, that is very true and very valid. But you do, throughout the story, see these little glimpses of, like, George wants to try. You know, like, I think at one point, like, he's trying to do something nice for Jenny, and then something falls apart and it doesn't work out, and then Jenny gets really upset about something. I don't, like, quite remember. It's been a little while, and I've read a lot of books since. But, you know, George has these moments, or, like, he has this one really, or he has moments where he has these, like, really great breaks, or, like, one of my favorite was when he goes to this school with, like, a volunteer hour opportunity with his job, and, like, him interacting with the kid that he's assigned to is just, like, so precious. Like, he doesn't really know what to do, but he tries, and he just wants to connect with this little girl, and it's a great moment. But then it ends up backfiring for him. And so it's like everything that George tries to do, it just backfires. And so he just gets to where, like, when Jenny's helping him pack, and he just kind of sits and, you know, plays his video game, gets super into it. There are, like, I think there's a lot of, like, mental health components to this, and maybe a lot of, like, things that you could really analyze into, you know, well, really what makes George tick. I'm not really going to get into that right now, but, you know, we could if that's something that people would be interested in. But we could have more of a longer dialogue. But I feel like if you made it from Jenny's perspective, you would miss all of that about George. So I think being able to kind of see this third-person bird's eye view, you can kind of see these things that maybe just from Jenny you wouldn't have gotten to see because she didn't see it. And so all of that combined had some people labeling this as cringe fiction, and I'm not really sure exactly what that necessarily points to. I think maybe just, like, you know, you have this ridiculous guy and this girl, and it's just kind of like a, you know, cringy story about, like, kind of like a Chad, you know, he's a George. But I think that for me, the story was really raw. It was really relatable. I think that, you know, this is one of the things that inspires me to do what I do as a profession because, you know, I want to help people. Like, I work with teens right now that could very easily fall into this middle and just be kind of glazed over in the school system, and, you know, they don't have those people to support them and help them navigate life. And so to me, like, I connected to this, not necessarily because, I mean, I hope I'm not a George, I don't know, maybe I am, but I think that for me it's really important to make sure that we help people not become a George. I mean, if that's what ends up happening, that's what ends up happening, but it's like, how can we help people to live a more fulfilling life? Because now at the end you kind of see maybe a potential for that for George, but overall, like, throughout most of this book, he's kind of like, well, what's the point, you know? And so I think that's what really makes this book interesting for me, and I think that a lot of people didn't feel that way. And, I mean, that's okay if you didn't, but I really felt like this book was a lot more raw and powerful than people were giving it credit for. And then, so along those lines, you know, like I said, no growth in character. And for some people, that made it not an enjoyable book. Now, if you look back at some of my other videos, if you look at my Onyx Storm video, if you look at my January reads, you can see, like, me commenting on lack of character development and character growth. And I've seen that in some of the things that I've read, especially, like, if you watch the January reads, you'll hear me talk about this one character named Faye, this one character named April from a couple different books. And so it drives me crazy when there is not character growth. So, like, I get it, but it's kind of like when this character is built up, and, like, here, I feel like George, and I cannot remember George's last name, so I apologize, but our George here, I think that that's on purpose. It really shows that, like, you know, like I said, he is enabled, and a lot of things happen to where, like, he doesn't really know how to have character growth. And it's like, yeah, he could go and do these things, but like I think a lot of times in our culture and in society, because this is pretty close to modern day, at the end it's like 2020, and so it's not really a commentary on 2020, except there's like some little nods to it. But so like in a more modern day context, I think it's very reflective of like, if you do not have a glaring issue or people to advocate for you, and you don't have that self-awareness, it's really hard to get out of these kind of slumps and funks. So I felt like it was very intentional. And so for me, it did make it an enjoyable book because it wasn't like the author wasn't aware that George was not engaging in character development. And so I think that's what makes it different for me from other books. So overall, like, I was laughing out loud. I thought it had a lot of really interesting takes on a different type of character. I think it was a different type of book. I do have like a couple other books that I've read that I feel like kind of fall into this kind of category of like kind of abnormal like personalities and kind of abnormal things in fiction that really like show humanity, and like, so I'm really kind of into that genre right now. So if you have more recommendations of things kind of like that, I would love to hear them. Put them in the comments below. I would love to expand my reading in this genre, so please help a girl out. But I did want to kind of touch on something that kind of that I've noticed in my reading in January, my reading here in February, including this book and contrasting it with the others that I've read, and looking through like the reviews and ratings and things people have said and just interactions with other people I've had. And I feel like a lot of times when we read a book where something like tragic happens or there's a lot of like trauma, I feel like we really kind of excuse people's behaviors. But then when it's like George and you have these kind of lower level things that are like impacting, or you know, things that weren't impactful, and you know, this person is doing these things over and over again, and then they're like, I hate that person, I hate that character, but then they give excuses for the other behaviors. I kind of have, I'm starting to like kind of have an issue with that, and just in the fact that like, I guess people want to read what they want to read, but I think that really like we need to be, I think like these types of books are coming out so that we can kind of develop awareness, develop sensitivity to different things that happen to people and how it can impact people differently. And so it's just very interesting to me. Like, there were some books that I've read recently that just like the character just super falls flat for me and I'm not really getting into it, but other people do, and or like the story really resonates with them, where me it feels very surface level. So I feel like George really went in depth, and I think that like showing George as this like central character that doesn't have growth, but it's like very purposeful, and I feel like Kate was like very intentional on the decisions she made, and I just overall really love it. So if you feel like this is a story that you could enjoy, I recommend go pick it up, borrow it from your library, order it, do whatever you can, because I think we really need to support Kate if this is something that you feel like you would be into. If you're kind of on the fence, I think you should give it a try. Just kind of come with an open mind. And if this doesn't sound like something that would appeal to you, I hope that maybe some of this information was helpful and you kind of know maybe don't dive into the world of our friend George. I am interested to see what else maybe Kate Greathead either has written or will write, because if it's anything like this, I think that I could be pretty into it. So thank you for watching. I hope that you have a great time until we meet again. I hope you enjoyed this little alien abduction and getting to see inside of maybe a different perspective to a book that you may or may not have heard of before. And if you have any popular opinions, unpopular opinions, issues with anything I said, agree with anything I said, have any book recommendations, any kind of interaction or engagement you would like to have, please use the comment section, and I will see you next time. Bye, humans.